So I think, Pete, would you like to come back at that now and say a few words?
Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks particularly to Ishbel. I'm going to be really quite brief, but before we go into kind of open discussion, I just want to say why, personally, I think the St Fitticks campaign is so important. I mean, Ishbel's described how it's been right at the heart of Aberdeen and Aberdeen's part in, major part in the UK's oil and gas industry. And one of the things that I think, other people may want to talk about a bit more, but for 50 years, North Sea oil and gas has been a trailblazer for many of the practices that characterize modern, what we call neoliberal economies. And I think it's worth just saying what that means in reality. Uh, what in terms of the people that work for them, they've single-mindedly aimed at atomizing the offshore workforce by forcing workers to operate as contractors rather than employees. They've offered short-term contracts. There's been lots of blacklisting and driving down wages and conditions. And at the same time as they've done that, they've been absolutely delighted to ride the waves of a volatile and extraordinarily profitable market. I mean, in my notes, I put inverted commas around market because, uh, they claim that the market price is sacrosanct and they've resisted any kind of regulation. And, we're seeing the consequences of that in the cost of living crisis at the moment. But when you dig underneath that, these apostles of the free market have actually just been cashing in on a regime of low taxation and high levels of state subsidy. One of the things we did on the Scotty 3 website a couple of years ago now was we were very lucky to be offered a report by a international tax expert, John Carlos Bouet, who had gone to kind of forensic detail to show that if you look at the subsidies that the oil companies have had in the North Sea and then compare them with what they've paid in tax since the beginning of their operations, the subsidies outweigh the tax payments by about 250 billion pounds. I mean, it's a vast sum of money. And those sums of money that have gone in, those profits have flowed into the offshore bank accounts of the big shareholders. They certainly haven't gone into communities like Tory. And, so Tory's been left in poverty while others have made untold wealth. Now, when we look at the the grotesque nature of what the um, the Scottish Government reporter is allowing to happen in Tory, I, it's really all of a piece with the strategy for the North Sea and for oil and gas that has been developing over the last few years. Because although at the same time there's been rhetoric, more so perhaps from the Scottish Government than the Westminster one, but both of them have talked about transition. But the shape of that transition has been wrapped up in what they've recently published as the North Sea Transition Deal, and that actually means putting a great deal of detail into what they've been done by basically by legislation for a long time to get every last scrap of oil and gas out of the North Sea. So Ishbel's right that it's uh, an industry in its kind of dying days, but uh, they want those dying days to carry on for a long time to come. And as they kind of scrape out the last of the oil and gas in a way that's a disaster for the climate, it also means really, really high costs for energy, um, which is a kind of ironic when they're claiming that this is a response to the cost of living crisis. It's not. It's actually a doubling down of a strategy they already had, and it's also a disaster for jobs as well because the alternatives, which would be to put all that vast investment into renewables instead, would create far more jobs. And for the future of Aberdeen and for communities like Torry, the the difference that investment in renewables would make is just like chalk and cheese. Um, but I just want to finish by saying it because I think this is says something about what you know the wider movement needs to do in support of the St Fitticks campaign is that North Sea transition, so-called approach, isn't just a deal between the big oil and gas producers and the Westminster government. Sadly, the Scottish government and the unions that organise offshore workers are also signed up to it. Now, there are some signs that the Scottish government would wish to pursue a different path, but mostly those have been in words, and I guess the Tories are a really good example of how actions actually belie that rhetoric. So it's very far yet from making a clean break. So I think one of the reasons why I'm really keen to get the message about St Fitticks out is that the campaigns that are ongoing about stopping new oil and gas fields like Cambo and Rosebank and Jackdaw and all the others that are in the pipeline now um, are really important. But I think we need a broader perspective that also highlights what the rotten agreement is that's driving these developments, and that underpins the way in which St Fitticks and other places are going to continue to be uh, have the environment trashed in the sake of the dragging out the lifetime of the oil and gas industry. Where and Ishbel mentioned it as well. The sheer the huge waste of money that's going um, into into these projects when used for environmentally sustainable projects, they would be so much more valuable for the future. So I'm going to stop there, but I hope that we can talk about all of these issues a bit more in the discussion, and perhaps at the end come back to what we can do to grow the campaign at the end.